Admiral Mullen became chairman on October 1st of this year, and he stands in the long lineage of names like Omar Bradley, Nathan Twining, Max Taylor, Tom Maurer, Colin Powell, and many other honorable men and who have served the country. And I've had the personal privilege of working for Admiral Mullen on tasks, and I really want to extend the warmest possible welcome. So if we could give him a round of applause, welcome him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. One might wonder why I'm here today, and I think it's important to recognize somebody that's been pretty special in my life, and that's Professor Bracken. Before I had this job, and I've only had it a couple months, Professor Bracken has participated on an executive panel for the head of the Navy for the last several years. And before I was in this job, I was in that job, and that's where I got to know him. And he brought great value to me as a leader of a pretty big organization. Sometimes you can get wound up in the day-to-day details and not sit back and be able to think too much about the big picture. And I know this is a course about strategy, and among other things. And I'd be interested to hear your views on what you're learning about strategy and technology and war. I'm actually very much into all three of those right now in my current life, and have been for a while. But it really is part of what I consider to be, really it's sort of a two thought stream obligation that Professor Bracken has given an awful lot of his time to the United States Navy in particular, which extends to the several hundred thousand, 322,000 active duty members who serve in the Navy and their families. And I can't say enough about that, and I'm very appreciative of all that. So when I get asked to do something like that for someone who has done so much for us, it's pretty easy to say yes. That's one reason. The other is I talk to a lot of audiences. Most of them, actually many of them are the same age as you, but most of them are military. And I think it's important for all of us in the military, and that's all of us, but particularly senior leadership, to get out from those audiences and to say a few words to audiences like this. So I really look forward to this as a great opportunity, and what I'd like to do just over the next few minutes is say a few things and then really open it up and hear what might be on your mind. I'll tell you, and this is, I'm not comfortable doing this, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I actually grew up on the West Coast. I'm an LA guy. I don't see any Lakers hats or Dodgers jerseys here. I see a few others. But I grew up out there and actually grew up in the movie business. Didn't have anything to do with the military. At a time, actually, when every male role model in my neighborhood, the fathers, the uncles, all had served in World War II, but I never gave that much thought. And enjoyed an upbringing in the same area, lived in the same place until I was 17. But I had this hankering to go east. I was a basketball player. I loved Bill Bradley as a kid. He was, you may not know that, but I mean, he was the best there was back then. And he didn't go to Yale. You probably know that. He went to Princeton, one of those other schools. But I had this hankering, and I got this opportunity. And I was raised, as I said, in the movie business, but I was oldest of 5 kids, and my father insisted I go to college. And if I was going to go to college and go somewhere that I wanted to go, most likely, I'd have to get some kind of scholarship. So the Naval Academy offered me an opportunity to go play basketball and come east to Annapolis. Never been there. Never been east, been out of California once, actually, once to Iowa, once to Illinois. Got on a plane, flew to Baltimore. The end of June, it was 95 degrees. It was 95% humidity. I got off the airplane and I said, I cannot believe people live in this, because in California, if you go to the dictionaries in California, you can't find the word humidity. it's gone. So I hadn't experienced that. But that first day, met a group of people, my classmates were your plebes at the Naval Academy, but my classmates who were great people from all over the country, in some cases all over the world. And many of them are still my closest friends, some 40 plus years later. Very special people, became a very special place as this is to you, and it's something that I just never look back from. Didn't have any plans. Actually, initially had not planned to stay in the Navy, and the Navy kept giving me responsibility. I got out to see the world. First war was Vietnam. That's what I grew up in. And I went to my first combat deployment in '69. And that influences me greatly in how I think and how I lead right now. And I remember those times, growing up, not just in the 60s and 70s, but where we were as a nation, where we were as a military, and looking at how the relationship of where we were then to where we are now. And it was vastly different in many ways, but also not, there are certainly some comparisons that I think are valid, given the conflicts that we're in right now, and the world that we're living in. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But the point is, I had no plans to do this. One of the things I always try to encourage young people to do is don't burn all your bridges at one time. You just never know what life's going to bring. You never know what opportunities are going to be out there, and they are vast. And what happened after I graduated from Annapolis, I find myself on the deck of a ship, which I'd never been on in my life, save a midshipman cruise while I was at Annapolis, headed off to Vietnam to see the world. I saw Hong Kong, I saw Japan, I saw the Philippines, I went to Hawaii, in addition to getting into the middle of a pretty tough war back then. So it just opened up my eyes. I enjoyed that a great deal, and I have enjoyed the Navy and serving in the military literally every day since. And what's happened to me is just additional responsibility. Again, originally in the Navy, you seek to command ships, and I was given that opportunity, never had any plans to stay beyond 20 years. And then, lo and behold, additional responsibilities added on, and it was an area that I enjoyed a great deal. Provided for my family, raised two sons who were thriving, and we lived all over the world. Lived in the Philippines, lived in Italy, lived from Bremerton, Washington, down to San Diego, California, and on this coast lived from Newport down to Norfolk, Virginia. So we've seen a lot, and all that time, back to what I said before, the people that I have been around have been the best people I could imagine in the world. So you don't know what life's going to bring, and I certainly didn't. And as Professor Bracken said, I've had this job for 2 months. Believe me, last summer, the last thing in the world I thought I'd be doing was be in this assignment. I had been in charge of the Navy for 2 years. It's normally a 4-year tour. I expected 2 more years, and my wife and I was going to retire. We're going to do some traveling, some things that we haven't been able to do, and this freight train came running by me and ran right over me, and I did not see it coming. That said, it's a tremendous privilege to be able to serve at this particular point in time. And then that's something else that I think is really important. And I didn't grow up thinking I needed to serve or I wanted to serve, but that's another piece that has grown on me over time, is service, in this case, service to our nation in uniform. But we're at a time in a nation, and I believe in a world, where that service is absolutely vital. And it certainly doesn't have to be in the military, but serving others. And what I've found is I've gotten back a whole lot more than I ever gave when I did that. So it's been a tremendous run in that regard. Certainly many things unexpected, and very challenging, very stimulating. And in my case, I like variety, and I get a lot of variety every day. Believe me, there isn't one professional day in my life that was similar to the one that was before or any before it. I've met peoples from all over the world. I mean, in recent times, just in the last couple of years, traveled to Vietnam, back to that first war. Nice to go back to a place in North Vietnam, which was where I first fought on the gun line off the shore there, supporting Marines and soldiers ashore in 1969. Nice to go back and see a country that's thriving, that welcomes you. People smile, that their economy is thriving, and see parents raising young children and pretty positive about their outlook for the future. There, China, Pakistan, India, many countries in Europe, South America, many countries there as well. So it's provided me a view of the globe that sometimes is very difficult to get back here in New Haven or other parts of the country. And yet this globe is getting smaller and smaller. We're all more connected. We're all more interdependent. And the big driver for that in the long run is going to be the economic piece of this. And as I can remember sitting with a mother in Kosovo in 2004 in a trailer. She'd gotten thrown out of her home, and all she wanted to do was get, and this was the war, this was the Serbs and the Albanians in the late 90s, you may remember. But 5 or 6 years later, she still couldn't get back into her house, and all she wanted was a chance to get back into her home and raise her son and take care of him. And I find that to be a universal value in every country that I'm in, is families trying to raise their children to a higher standard of living in a safe and secure environment. So the opportunities that this life of service has provided have far exceeded anything I ever expected. And I would just commend that, again, opportunity that's out there to you, at service in whatever, and there have just been, not just myself, but too many people who've come back and said they've gotten so much more than they ever gave, and that the need is there is unquestioned. In my current job, I am, as Paul indicated, I'm the principal military advisor to the President of the United States. To the President, to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Bob Gates, to the National Security Council, which is the group of principal cabinet members that debate and decide issues on national security, and also to the Homeland Security Council, which is a relatively new council that's been set up since 9/11. As I flew in, I was just out in the middle of Pennsylvania at one of our war colleges, at Carlisle, our Army War College out there. But as I flew in this morning, and as a West Coast kid, I didn't have much family back east, but I did have an aunt down the road here in Westport. So I'm not unfamiliar. I spent a great deal of time in Connecticut over the years, but and in New York, and I've come to, some of my West Coast buddies actually accuse me of abandoning everything that I stood for on the West Coast, and now I'm an East Coast guy. But just flying in today, and I'm reminded of, and being this close to New York, of what happened some 6 years ago in New York City, where we lost 3,000 plus people in that attack. And that's something that's on my mind every single day. And that changed. I was actually in the Pentagon that day. The plane in the Pentagon flew in under my office. I was about 50 yards down the road in another office, but a couple of my assistants looked out the window and saw a 757 fly in under their feet. So what happened in New York, what happened there, what happened in Pennsylvania, speaking of being there today, is forever on my mind, and it is branded there, and it's something I'll never forget. And I said that day and believe today it flipped the world upside down, and I believe that. And so what I spend a lot of my time on right now are the major challenges at the strategic level of dealing with this conflict that we're in, and we're going to be in it for a long time. And it is there's an awful lot, and it's back to sort of this global view. There's an awful lot going on out there that is tied to radical jihadist extremists, the proliferation and availability of weapons of mass destruction. And actually, it is the convergence of those two things which is truly alarming, has truly alarming potential for me. In addition to areas of instability, and it is easy and right to focus on the Middle East. I'm encouraged and mindful very much of the meeting that occurred yesterday in Annapolis, the Annapolis Conference, because the Israeli-Palestinian piece of that instability is clearly one of the issues at the heart of achieving stability in that part of the world. And it is a tough problem. It's been there a long time. In addition to being in Vietnam, I happened to be in the Mediterranean in the middle of the '73 war as well. And so I've seen that and experienced that throughout my life. But I'm encouraged by the steps that were taken yesterday. But I'm talking about the broader Middle East and stability there. Iraq, clearly, Afghanistan, but on the eastern side of the Middle East, Iran, and on the western side, the Palestinian-Israeli piece. And there are a lot of other things in between that I think that are tied to our interests in this country. We call them vital national interests. Stability or instability there affects us directly. And I think that will be the case increasingly over time until we start to see some stability there. But it's not just there. You don't have to spend much time looking in other parts of the world to look at Africa. In fact, one of the questions I just got at Carlisle was about Darfur and the comparison in Darfur, what's going on there now versus what happened in Rwanda in the early '90s, and why can't we do anything about that? And the international community struggling with figuring out how to reach that. And yes, yet this is a sovereign continent, sovereign nations. There are alliances which are addressing that. So it isn't just as easy to say, let's all go do this and get it done. And many, many issues associated with that. Growing, certainly, the chaos that is there in northern Africa, which is fertile ground for terrorists, and they're growing them there, and it's they're in what I call ungoverned spaces, where the government is not strong. There are those kinds of places in many parts of the world, even in our own hemisphere. And one of the things from the United States perspective that I have grown up, and this is as someone that didn't grow up very far from Mexico, we don't look north and south very well. We have a tendency to look east and west. And I think what I see is strategically more and more we need to look north and south. And looking at the potential partnerships, the emerging countries, the economic engines that are south of us in our own hemisphere, as well as the challenges that are there with some of the leadership as it moves forward very, very vociferously in terms of pushing hard against the United States and what we stand for. We need to be mindful of that. And I can walk around the world and talk about challenges that we have globally. And one of the assumptions that I make is that the United States will continue to be engaged globally and for the foreseeable future, about as far out as I can see. So it isn't just about this long war. It isn't just about the weapons of mass destruction potential. It's about the instability. It's also about pandemics. It's about natural disasters. We have a significant sized group of people right now in Bangladesh providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief when they've lost over 3,000 people in the recent floods. Certainly you're aware of what happened in the tsunami out in Indonesia and India in 2004. Katrina on our own shores. These things seem to be coming in a much more rapid rate, or I was asleep at the switch, clearly coming at a much more rapid rate than they used to. And responsible response to them, I think, is very important. And we are a very wealthy nation with great resources, and my belief is great hearts to assist where we can. And that's really, it's where we can and where we are invited as well. Always mindful that countries all over the world are sovereign, they're proud, and they want very much to try to take care of themselves. So, and we need partners, we need coalitions, we need relationships across the full spectrum of sectors in our country, and not just the military, not just the government. We find ourselves in the military involved much more now in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief with non-government organizations, and they are prolific around the world trying to make a difference as well. So that is the strategic environment in which I find myself assuming this job. Clearly great focus on the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, but not singular focus. Don't think we can do that because the world's too big and there's too much going on. And to the degree we ignore parts of the world, that's in my view, an increasing risk against the stability that our engagement often provides and the partnerships that get created to assist in that and actually become foundational for that kind of stability. What keeps me awake at night, I've talked a little bit about it already. One is the Middle East, and where does that go? And clearly, actually the first week, and it wasn't my first trip, but the first week I was in this job, I went to Iraq and I went to Afghanistan to see for myself, and that's just a leadership thing for me. It's very important for me to get out and see what's going on the ground, to talk to those who are in the field executing these policies, to make my own assessment about what's going on, and to listen to them, One of the things I've tried to keep in mind is just three simple words: listen, learn, and lead. And it is in the listening that I'm able to learn and then make decisions, feeding that into leadership decisions that are very important. And so going out there, and there'd been an awful lot of discussion, and I'd been briefed and seen the statistics that security was better in Iraq, and yet I needed to see it and talk to those who were doing it, and just be reminded that those troops that are out there right now are out there for 15 months straight. They get 18 days sometime in that 15 months to come home, but basically they're out there for 15 months at a crack. And that goes back to my Vietnam days. In Vietnam, we did one-year deployments. And there's a finite end to how long those are going to last. That is true here now. But because our ground forces, our Army and our Marine Corps, are pressed, right now they're out there for 15 months and they're coming back for 12, the Army is. The Marine Corps is doing shorter deployments, but they're going back more often. They're out for 7 months and coming back 7 at a time. Great, there's great pressure on them. There's also great pressure on their families. One of the things that's part of the sacrifice, but you miss a lot of birthdays and anniversaries and holidays and those things that are pretty special to all of us that sometimes we take for granted. And again, the number of those you can miss eventually, that's got a finite life on it as well. So certainly what's going on there is very much on my mind. Security is better. The economy is starting to work. There is reconciliation going on in the provinces. We need, quite frankly, the big step that needs to be taken is political reconciliation at the very senior level in their governments. So that's a very high priority for me. Secondly is to make sure that it's not just about the here and now, that clearly we've got to focus on Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East, but there's a future. Part of what individuals like me get paid to do is figure out what's happening down the road and to be ready for that. And so it's this balance of making sure we can succeed where we are right now and then prepare for the future. So, and balancing that risk of what's going on in the future is another piece. And a big part of that is having a vibrant, viable armed force across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, active and reserves, so that we can provide the kind of security and carry out the kinds of missions that we get literally tasked from our nation. Typically that comes from the president, but really it's from the nation as a whole, and continue to make a difference. And be engaged around the world. And back to this long war, it's that engagement piece, it's that relationship piece, it's that cultural piece, it's the language piece, all those things that we understand better and better about what's going on in other parts of the world that I think will be preventative and deterrent for the future, as opposed to, and I'd much rather deter and prevent than get into a fight. But right now we're into two, and at the same time, we are challenged with making sure we're out and about in other parts of the world in a preventative fashion. So, and then back to what I said, there's great pressure on our people and on our families because of the pace of operations over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. So that is a second priority, balancing that obviously with the mission that we have. And then thirdly is this whole issue of looking beyond Iraq and Afghanistan and getting the global risk balance right for the future. Future is pretty hard to predict. One anecdote that I use is, and it goes back and starts in my Vietnam time, when Secretary-designate McNamara was before the Senate for confirmation, nobody asked him a question about Vietnam. When Secretary-designate Cheney was before the Senate, before he came in as Secretary of Defense, nobody asked him a question about Iraq. And when Secretary-designate Rumsfeld was coming in for confirmation, he didn't get one question about Afghanistan. And it speaks to our ability to kind of look to the future and know exactly what's going to happen. I'm very comfortable that being out there is going to continue to be very, very challenging. And we're going to need a robust military force to represent us in all the things this nation asks us to do. But exactly where, exactly when, and exactly what capabilities it's going to take precisely is going to be difficult. And so I come at this from a balanced perspective. We're going to need a balanced portfolio. You won't find me going down to Atlantic City or going to Vegas and taking all my money and putting it on one number. It's just not my style. To try to keep it balanced in that regard is a real challenge. There are lots of challenges associated with those three priorities, but trying to develop a strategy for the Middle East from the military perspective, get it right for our people and make sure we can carry out the mission and that we retain and we don't start to have a significant drain of our young officers and our young enlisted. Because I've been through that before, and that's very difficult. That takes decades to recover from. And also invest for the future. And how do you know how to invest? Actually, I'd want to ask you, what technology should we be since this is about technology and strategy, what should we be investing in the future? I'd be interested to hear your answer. But what kind of investment should we make? Because we do that all the time as well. And we need to get that right. And the leading edge that we have on technology, in many ways, the gap is closing. The refresh rate is much shorter than it used to be, and it can be incredibly expensive to do this. And some of these, like a business, we have some pretty significant capital assets that cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to invest in. How do you, one, get it right? Two, how do you build it so that you can keep it current over its life of 20, 30, 40, in some cases 50 years, which can be very daunting as well. So I'd be interested to hear, from a technology standpoint, as I've talked a little bit about the strategy aspect of this, and as it applies to the wars that we're fighting in, I'd be interested in your views on it.